that. So I think that says a lot.
So you think maybe just scholars are sort of grasping at straws, trying to figure out why,
Well,
the
I think
Gnostics
they
or
just
the
had.
Jews or the Christians or Muhammad had these visions.
Well, I just think that in the case of the Gnostics, the earlier theories, a lot of people said, the people who put those theories out didn't know about visionary plants, and they weren't well educated in how visions are produced. I mean, look, there's only a very limited number of ways that those type of experiences can be created. And each type of way, like let's say fasting or meditation or shamanic drumming or say like a sensory deprivation type of experience, they all have unique characteristics. You have to have a certain environment, certain preparation, and the experiences themselves are different. Meditation experiences are very different from someone who's saying having an experience with mushrooms, or mushrooms are very different from, say, ayahuasca or something of that nature. So by having an understanding of how these experiences affect the mind, affect the body, you can say, okay, well, these people are having visions. What were the visions most like? What were the activities surrounding the creation of the visions? And you quickly get a very short list of possibilities. And I think that the people who created the theories previously just didn't have a full understanding of that.
And before we get into the how of how the Gnostics got their visions specifically, could you tell us about some of the rituals and sacraments, I guess you call the outer mysteries,
In my book, I primarily focus on the visionary books because I wanted to find out who was having the visions and how they were being created. And there's some Gnostic groups that didn't have visions. The Mandaeans or Mandaeans is a perfect example. They have, they follow John the Baptist as their last great prophet. They're originate from Mesopotamia, and they're very, very old and ancient. Their books are filled with visionary types of religious imagery. But they don't practice any visionary rituals, and there's no evidence in their writing that they conduct them. So does that mean that they never did? We don't really know. But it's very interesting when you look at the older Gnostic texts, the ones preceding the modern era, the ones from the Nag Hammadi, ones from Egypt in particular, the rites and rituals bear a lot of similarity. But almost all of the experiences from a lot of the visionary cults or the visionary Gnostic groups in the Egyptian area are the ones that are the most visionary and the ones that usually describe some type of ritual and then some type of mystical or visionary experience, which was the keystone of the initiation. And the Valentinians, they were more Christian and more, later. And I think they've got a lot of their traditions and things from the older Sethian Gnostics. And I think Jesus was involved in that. It shows you that the wellspring from where Jesus came from. And I think that makes you appreciate Jesus and Christianity a lot deeper by having that kind of information.
And what would you say was the Five Seals ritual that a lot of scholars are still debating about?
It's very similar to the Christian one, but the final seal it appears to be similar with the Valentinian tradition and the Sethian Gnostic tradition, that there was a fifth seal or fifth step, and which was the visionary experience, the stage that brought on initiation, if you will. And it's almost as if the modern Catholic Church took the baptism ritual, extracted the visionary element from it, extracted the full water immersion. You have this container of ritual devoid of its original connection to experiencing divine reality or alternate dimensional type of a thing. And I think that's what went down in the fight for orthodoxy. it's a little too bad that some more didn't survive. And for it's interesting how the whole thing developed and shook out. And one of the things that's always kind of bummed me out a little bit is that the Gnostics, they were so secretive. It was a secret tradition, and that there wasn't more written down saying, this is how we create these visions. I mean, just to get the rituals, you have to take pieces from different books. You basically organize, these are Sethian, these are Valentinian, and piece them together. And I had to go through a number of research papers, scholars, and piecing together all their different work on trying to put together the different rituals, because there's not one book that, like, say, the Gospel of Egyptians, it says a lot of ritual activity, but it leaves a lot of stuff out. You're like, well, what happened? Or it's not very descriptive. Like, they weren't trying to document anything like we are now. It wasn't quite like that. So, there's a lot of mystery that you have to kind of piece together. And I think that's kind of why it's taken so long and it's been so slow, really kind of digging into Gnosticism all these years since we've really found the library in Egypt to get to the place where we are now.
Would you say that the Valentinian bridal chamber is equal to the last seal, the apex of the ritual?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. There's one guy who came out with a theory saying that he thought the bridal chamber was some type of sexual rite. And I think everyone who knows anything about Gnosticism knows that it most likely was not any type of physical ecstasy. And if you read what Philip or any of the Valentinian Gnostics said, it's clearly an experience of the divine, and it's basically like a near-death experience. You see the light, you see luminous beings, angels, you ascend into higher or lower hierarchical realms. They actually do talk about cups being drank, and baptism. And in the later parts of the book, when I talk about the decline of Gnosticism and early Christian history, I actually uncovered quite a bit of interesting evidence and research that had been done by other scholars that actually showed that the visionary rites that you see in the Valentinian tradition were being extracted out of Christianity, and that as Christianity was dividing from the west to the east, basically the Gnostics in Egypt got really heavily persecuted, and you can see it within the literature that they were replacing these visionary rites with non-visionary rites. And there's hard evidence that these things were going on, and that they were buried, and they've basically been buried for 2,000 years. So that's kind of why I've personally been on a mission to try to share this with people so they can have this understanding and try to bring out this knowledge that's been hidden for so long.
And Luke, now to the meat of the matter. According to your research, how did the Gnostic sects gain their amazing visions and insights? In other words, what were they taking?
The first clue that got me on the path was, if you compare Gnostic visions, the thing that they're most similar to is near-death experiences, visions of light, entering dimensional heavenly realms, various things. And the brain, a lot of people don't know, but when somebody is having a near-death experience, the experience is created by a specific visionary psychedelic neurotransmitter called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And this compound exists naturally within all of our brains. It's within all mammalian brains, mice, deer, all mammals have it. And the interesting thing is it's also in nature, particularly in plants. And for some reason that we have no explanation for, certain plants throughout the world have no reason to create DMT, but they do, and in relatively high amounts. Now, if you took this, say a visionary bush, this bush that contains this neurotransmitter, and you ate it, it would do nothing because your gut has a compound that denatures this DMT. It breaks it down before it can reach the blood-brain barrier. But if you take another plant, there's another plant that contains a compound called ayahuasca. And this vine, that ayahuasca comes from the Amazon, will allow the DMT, when consumed, to reveal its effects, to pass into the blood-brain barrier. Well, natives, Indians in the Amazon area, thousands or hundreds of years ago, found these plants somehow, mixed them together, and created a visionary medical drink called ayahuasca. I started exploring ayahuasca very heavily and came to realize that it was the exact same experiences that the Gnostics were talking about. And I basically needed to prove it to the world. I needed to prove how and what evidence there was that this was true. And the first piece of evidence is that the plants to create these visions, they grow in the Middle East. There's a plant called Punjum Hermala, and it was used as a medicine, a very important medicine in ancient Iran and ancient Persia and Mesopotamia. And I found texts as I was studying the Mandaeans that they have very old texts that are Mesopotamian in origin, that have been passed down in their group for a very long time, that describe this plant, and they venerate it as a holy medicine, as a great power. And it shows direct evidence that one of the two plants necessary for creating this visionary mixture were being used by an ancient Gnostic group. And then, of course, the visionary component that has this DMT that I'm talking about, that also grows very prevalently in the Middle East in certain types of acacia trees. And as you may or may not know, the acacia tree is very sacred in the Middle East. A lot of the Egyptians, the Jews, Islam, a lot of pre-Islamic deities venerated the acacia tree. And for a long time, nobody really knew why. And then they discovered that it had DMT in the leaf tissue. And then a lot of speculation started getting brought up, but there was no real evidence until you really look into these two plants, how they're being used. And then right around the same time that these plants are really getting a lot of heavy use, you have the Gnostic books start coming out with visions that are exactly like the effects that these plants produce.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You point out in your book that the acacia tree is also one of the symbols of the Freemasons. That made me go,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there was any kind of conspiracy there, but I think the Freemasons do have some ancient knowledge that's been passed down. And, yeah, I think that is interesting.
And, Luke, what are some of the parallels between the visions of the Gnostics and the ayahuasca experience? You mentioned near death. What are some of the other ones?
Well, that's a great question. So basically, pretty much everything. The Gnostics, the Sethian Gnostics, and the Valentinian Gnostics were vegetarians. And the MAO inhibitors that allow the DMT to work in the body, you can't have meat. If you have meat, it will give you a lot of pain in your gut. It'll be very uncomfortable. And you have to fast from meat for at least 3 days before you take ayahuasca. When you go to the Amazon, they have special diets that you take, and they're all vegetarian. And they say that it's a design by the brew or God or whatever. And that's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is gnosis. The Gnostics were Gnostics because, they venerated the Gnostic experience of initiation, gnosis, knowledge. When you take ayahuasca, and the way I took it, and in a lot of ways you can take it down in South America, it's in complete darkness. There's no light around because when you're going into this space, the sensory input from the eyes, it doesn't allow for the visions as well. And if you're on a really strong dose, you can't, the two, they cross, the information crosses and it messes with you. And when you're in complete darkness, you don't have that input coming in. It's just the visions. Your mind is perfectly clear and aware, and then you begin to be shown things. It's almost like ayahuasca comes and holds your hand and shows you things about yourself, about the universe. And there's a lot going on. The mind is a very complex thing. There's elements of your mind. There's elements of the universe and higher spiritual things coming in. And then there's God. And I like to say that, or think that God, the mind of God is in the brew, and that it will, and a lot of the things that happen, the general theme, it's like it's trying to teach you something, work out problems that you've had in your life, cleanse you, heal you, illuminate you, give you knowledge. And knowledge is a very big theme of the brew. And it's just like it is with the Gnostics. Their rituals gave them what I'm talking about, this knowledge and these experiences. And then I would say some of the more detailed elements of the visions, like encountering beings, angelic beings of light. I've encountered various strange, from beautiful to strange, a whole dimension of, it's almost like there's no real words in English to describe a lot of these things, but there's levels, and like as you ascend into these different levels, they are inhabited by various beings, and particularly when you enter the celestial regions, luminous beings that some are not so interested in you. Some, seem like they're almost very alien, and they just notice that you're there. They come and like look at you, or they stand, maybe stay off in the distance. And then some might come closer. Really, everyone's experience is different. It takes a while even to maybe meet some of these beings, because it's an evolutionary process, a process of